But our next presenter is Tom Jordan, and he is a 30-year veteran and an industry expert in the realm of designing effective compensation strategies that work. Chances are you think differently about compensation now than you did a few months ago. So let's face it, COVID-19 made us think a little differently about a lot of things. Although we've survived the crisis so far, your pay strategy going forward probably needs to change. Business leaders are struggling to determine how to effectively reward performance in the new economy without creating the same financial vulnerabilities many companies have just experienced. So please welcome our guest, Tom Jordan, as he shares his insights into compensation for the new business world. Tom, welcome. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow you to move on with your presentation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Hope everybody can hear me, and really delighted to be here. Thank you for having me on your panel today. Being in the compensation business for almost 3 decades and having worked with over 600 companies and still provide services to them, we were impacted in a very different way, I think, when COVID hit. The March, April timeframe, virtually every owner that we have as a client, they were consumed with PPP and all other fire drill activities to kind of wait for a little bit of the calm to settle down. And sure enough, towards the end of April into May, we were inundated by our clients that and their main concern was, we've got quarterly bonuses coming up that we've promised, and our projections have gone out the window financially at the time, so our strategic planning for the balance of the year is totally off the rail. What do we do? And so we've spent the last 6-7 months working with many of our clients, re-engineering their bonus plans and also their long-term incentive plans for retention and reward of key people. So, what I want to do today, when the rest of our time is give you a little insight into the world that I work in and the kinds of questions that I get from owners and CEOs of companies as it relates to literally 40 to 50% of your expense budget each year, and that's compensation. That's a big one, and to help you maybe begin to understand the tie between compensation and growth and value creation in your company. So let's start with a question. If you'll pull that question up, Kevin, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, if the way you pay your people, bonus them and retain them financially, is a pain point for you, how would you solve the problem? Why don't you give us some answers here, and well, I guess we'll give it a minute or so to gather the results, and that may form the basis of some of the points that we talk about. Pay them more, add more performance metrics, tie all compensation rewards to a value creation formula, or just divide the pie equally to all employees. Pie meaning whatever you pay out in above and beyond actual base salaries. Not surprised to see the answers that we got. Adding performance metrics is certainly a process that's been around for a long time, and tying all compensation rewards to value creation. And we do have a little bit in dividing the pie. So what we'll talk about today is when you're dealing with compensation, whether it be establishing base salary metrics based on peer data, when you're trying to formulate a bonus plan that actually really works, or if you're looking at retaining and how to retain and reward your best people, and ultimately, how do you create a culture where people want to stay because they see a long future with you. All of these questions and all of these issues raise in our world, in the compensation world, a pain point. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Kevin. So the pain point, go ahead and keep advancing for me if you wouldn't mind. So it is people, right? They're the cornerstone, the most important thing that we have in our business. Keep advancing. Just keep clicking through it. Attracting new talent is a big deal. Competing for C-suite talent against bigger companies with deeper pockets. And keep clicking. Managing employees, and as compensation relates to that, keep clicking. And keeping people happy. These are issues that come up all the time, and there are many more out there. But what we want to talk about today is introducing to you a methodology that can permeate every aspect of employee onboarding, retention, reward, and ultimately retire. So we're going to introduce to you today a program I've developed many years ago called the 5R Compensation Matrix. Let's go ahead and advance through. Go ahead and advance that. And what we want to talk a little bit about today is the difference between looking at your comp expense as a budget item or looking at your comp expense as an investment in a compensation strategy. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of these 5 areas that we work very intimately in with all of our clients across the country. So the first one is in the recruiting area. We have found that recruiting has changed a lot. We have a culturally different workforce coming into business, and they have expectations different than people 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so this whole idea of how do we attract new talent has really become an issue, particularly for companies that are experiencing growth at hyper speeds. As you grow, you're going to be attracting a different kind of person to your company because you're changing, your growth rates are changing, your culture's changing, your markets are expanding, and the new people you bring in need to respond to that and also need to reflect that. I'll tell you a story. Working with a client now who's in the oil and gas service business. They have about 400 employees. And they, in the last year, signed a contract with Motiva, which is a subsidiary of Saudi, the Saudi Oil, Aramco, I think it's called. And all of a sudden, they've gone from what we all would call kind of a mom and pop company to a real company with structure and organization. And they're growing rapidly at a pace of about 25 to 30% pretty much each quarter. And I was having a conversation with the CEO the other day, and I asked him, I said, what's your biggest problem right now as it relates to bringing in new talent? And he said, the biggest problem I have is because of our growth and because of the expertise and experience that we need in all of these different positions, I've had to really go to people who are used to working with larger companies. And larger companies, the Fortune 1000 companies, for example, they have experienced compensation programs and layers of compensation structures that most smaller companies are not familiar with. So all of 20 to 30 years of growing this company, they are talking to people both geographically at greater distances from the company located here in San Antonio, but they're also talking to a higher caliber employee who is used to Fortune 100 benefit structures. And so that is a whole new aspect of attracting the right kind of people, because they're not going to be excited about a decent salary, and they're going to be used to a decent bonus structure, annual bonus structure. And in most scenarios, going from mom and pop to a larger enterprise, what I have experienced over the many years is that a lot of companies don't have anything that really has the retentive and reward qualities on a longer term basis. And so you've got to have a strategy of compensation even before someone comes to your company. And by the way, that exists right today in our COVID world. We're seeing a lot of movement. We're seeing companies that have taken the opportunity to upgrade their staffs and their employee count by getting a higher quality person brought to their company using the techniques and planning that we can bring them. So the recruiting of new talent should be consistent with your overall compensation philosophy. Let's go to number 2. The retention is always a hot topic and is a paramount concern. Business leaders that map out future salary strategies can retain talent they attracted without being in the top percentile for pay data. I got to tell you, of the 600 or so clients that we work with, I can count on 2 hands the ones that feel compelled to pay their people at the very top 90th percentile in peer data on all compensation data that we collect. And the point here is this: retaining your key people, particularly your key people, is really more of a messaging challenge than it is a financial one. The messaging is that you're telling this person that they're important, that they have a valuable contribution to make to this company. And because of that, we would probably suffer some sort of negative if we lost you. And so when an employer puts together a retention program for a key person or a group of key people, they are really sending a message that's consistent with their overall compensation philosophy that they would develop. And so you can read all kinds of surveys, today, but we figure a loss of a key person will cost about 4 times the annual salary and bonus that person received in the preceding year. So do your math. And that cost is a soft cost and a hard cost. And for those of you who have gone through the headache of losing a key person, literally sometimes overnight, you know what I'm talking about. So let's go on to number 3. The reward. The reward is a lost art. The frequent thank you in the form of money, benefits, spot bonuses is a critical missing piece to the culture of excellence and can amplify the strategy without overpaying. We believe that rewarding your people, not just in an annual bonus, which quite frankly, most businesses bonus plan, it's broken. And you know, we've done annual surveys that suggest that not even 20% of our customers and clients that we survey have been happy with their existing bonus plan, and they tend to change them every year. It's not uncommon to have to talk to a new business and their bonus plan is the 13th month salary, or it's a conversation that the owners and maybe a few key people get together over coffee and say, well, how much do you think we should give Joe this year? And how much should we give Mary? And how much do we give Sam? So, you know, we don't see structure and methodology baked into a reward strategy. And I'm telling you, the people that are going to come to work with you and for you, they want to be seen as partners in the future. And part of that is in the reward strategy for their contribution. So the reward issue is key in an overall plan that you come up with your company. Let's go on to the 4th one. The restore. Now, this is probably the most misunderstood and probably the least known aspect of having a compensation platform for your people. The restore aspect is your top people have a ceiling on what a traditional 401k plan allows them. Restoring helps them restore what they could have deferred if the demographics allowed this. Now, what this is all about is this. Most plans out there today have a 401k plan of some shape or size. And as you know, those plans have governmental limits. Typically today, a person cannot put any more than 19.5 in a 401k plan. And if they're older, they can put older than 55, they can put a little bit more in. But the other limitation is not governmental. The other limitation is what's called a test called the ADP test, annual deferral percentage. And what that is that a person who is a key employee or even an owner who's making 2, 3, 4, 500 or more thousand a year, they probably can't put even the 19.5 in their plans. They only can put in a percentage that is the average of the deferral percentage of their rank and file employees. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have 100 employees and 5 of you are top earners, the other 900 or 95 are rank and file, and the average percentage that rank and file group is putting into their 401k, let's say is 3%. Well, that dictates the percentage that everyone in the higher group can put in. So keep in mind that your limitations in 401k plans are driven not only by governmental maximums, but they're also driven by your ADP test. And so the end result is this. The higher paid people in your company, whether they're defined as key or not, are being discriminated against in the use of a deferral component in their retirement planning. And what that does is cascade problems with your key people, particularly in the retention aspect, and also recruiting for that matter, I've negotiated compensation packages for recruits, and I've negotiated for actual recruits looking for a job, and I've negotiated packages for companies who are looking at candidates, and many of them are coming out of plans or out of companies where they've had this deferral component available above and beyond the 401k limitation. So you don't have to be a big company to have this kind of feature in your compensation strategy. And I'll also add, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on the various aspects of this kind of plan. We'll talk a little bit more about it at a higher level in a few more slides. But keep in mind, this is an area that allows key people and owners to defer, if they choose to, from current taxation a whole lot more than perhaps they are limited in their 401k plan. So let's go to our next category, retire. If you want to show an employee you are invested for the long term, your compensation strategy should extend to affording maximum ability to retire with certainty and dignity, plus it will help the owner's plan too. This whole retirement aspect really plays into the culture and certainly spills into all of the other aspects of the 5R matrix. Someone who comes to you and likes what they do, is making a contribution, is retained well and rewarded well, they're going to stay with you, and they're going to, one of the reasons they're going to stay with you is that they can see the value of their overall retirement with their personal decisions that they make financially, and also with the company programs that you provide. And it leads itself into a very, very cohesive culture at each company. Now, before we go on to the next slide, you've heard me refer to this compensation strategy idea. It's real. Just like you have, for example, in your investment portfolio, you have an asset allocation. You have a strategy of investing your money. And you probably are familiar with all the pie charts that exist in a well-developed asset allocated strategy. My point to you is you should have, and you will benefit by having the same concept in your compensation strategy, where you can sit down with a recruit and you can sit down with your employees each and every year and show them very much in detail what their future looks like in all the different components of your total compensation expense. And without going into it today, because of time, we can actually quantify a return on compensation investment. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about this, I do want to suggest that you can go to my blog, thomasjjordan.com. You'll find a whole lot of information. I've got probably 30 different articles posted. I have 90-second videos on various aspects of this 5R that you can learn a lot about that. And certainly one of the things that we're going to do also is through Kevin, we'll be distributing one of the many e-books and white papers that I've written on this subject. And the one that you'll get here shortly after our day today is entitled "The Top 8 Reasons Bonus and Incentive Plans Do Not Work." And I'll tell you, it's a bit of a read. It's 28 pages, but I assure you, you may not learn what you should do for your company specifically, but you're going to learn a whole lot about what not to do. And all of those not what to do's come from over almost 30 years of experience of working with over 600 businesses. So I'm going to end here with a little bit of an introduction into what kind of plans exist out there. And the reason I'm bringing this up, go ahead and advance the slide, Kevin. Yeah, speaking of CEPAs, we actually work right within the value acceleration methodology. Chris and Scott talked about this morning, and what we have found is that in the preparation of expanding value in your business to an ultimate exit or transition to key people or family, what you do in the compensation area is critically important. So I just wanted to plug the CEPA world again just a little bit. Go on to the next one, Kevin. Okay, this is called the long-term incentive plan decision tree. And the reason I wanted to share a little bit of this with you is almost every conversation I have with someone that we're introduced to, and we're talking about compensation, especially if it's a pain point, their knowledge and understanding of what's available out there is somewhat limited. And here's usually how it goes. Tom, about the only way I feel like I can reward or even retain my key people is I've got to share stock with them in some way, somehow. Not sure I want to do that. I've been told by my advisors, my attorney, my CPA, that might not be a good idea for a number of reasons. Quite frankly, I'm not a big fan of the dilution of the ownership of this company and what is left for me. What can I do to make my key employees feel like they're partners in the growth of our business? And so that really goes into this decision tree. And essentially what it does, it points out that there are 9 different types of planning that you can do in the retention and reward arena financially that have a lot of sense. And each 9 of these, by the way, will have usually about a dozen variations. So there's a whole world, there's a whole spectrum of planning solutions for you that will address the 5 R's that we just covered. But if you'll just go briefly, you'd start at the top left. Excuse me. Are you going to grant equity or not? And if you say yes, you move to the right. And if you say no, you move down to the next level. But let me just cover a little bit about this. And if any of you want to have a follow-up conversation, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information again after I speak. But there's a whole world in the stock ownership area, performance shares, restricted stock. In the phantom stock area, many of you have heard the term phantom stock. And by the way, that tends to be probably the most used plan design in privately held companies that are lower mid-market and below. We'll talk more about that later if we have time. And then, of course, variations, performance phantom stock. And then in the non-equity based or synthetic equity based planning, we have strategic deferred compensation plan designs, we have performance unit plans, and we have profit pool plans, all of which address at least one, but most of them address at least 2 or 3 of the 5 R's that we've covered here in the last 30, 40 minutes. So I wanted to leave you as owners and as leaders of companies today, not with a whole bunch of information, but just the knowledge that there's an entire spectrum of planning opportunities that you have out there when you are dealing with the issues of compensation in the recruiting, in the retaining, in the rewarding, in the restoring, and the retiring of your company employees, and particularly your key employees. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude and hopefully leave a little time with some questions. Kevin, you want to navigate that for me?
Sure, Tom. We do have a couple of questions here, and let me just start with square one here. What is your website address? He did not catch that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was, I thought it was on the front page, but I'll give it to you again. It's MPN, Mary Paul Container, Inc., MPN Inc., INC.com. And you'll find plenty of information on there, our blogs, our videos. We've got a lot of research that we post. And for those of you who want to know more about my background, um, you can also go to my blog, Thomas J. Jordan, all one word.com, and then hit the About page, and you'll find out more about my background.
I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up a new screen here that does have your information on it, Tom. So you should be seeing that right now with his
Yeah, there you
telephone
go.
number, the website. If you'd like to reach out and contact Tom, there are a couple of other questions. In the stock versus phantom stock, could you expand on the restore aspect?
Yeah, well, they're two different subjects. I'll go on the phantom versus phantom stock, or the stock versus phantom stock. Unless you're in a major Fortune 1000 area, particularly if you're still privately held, if you're publicly held, it's just you're going to have the typical stock option programs, grant programs, restricted stock programs, etc. But in the privately held world, where you're dealing with shareholder input, owner input, the issues I brought up before about dilution tend to drive the concerns about sharing actual stock. And then if you talk to the legal community, lawyers who are intimately involved in helping business owners, you really run into a lot of potential minority owner problems, minority shareholder problems when you start handing out company stock, and unless you're just giving the company away and they become majority owners, you've got some issues of privacy in your accounting. You've got voting issues. You've got a lot of control issues, and as it was talked about before with Chris and Scott, control is a big issue for an owner. So all of that tends to guide us to more of a phantom stock design. And the big one to the recipient, not the owner, but to the recipient, is the taxation advantages of phantom stock versus actual stock.
Okay.
Now on the restore, what was your question on restore?
Just the difference between the two, I think.
Yeah. Well, in the restore area, that's where you are. That's where a company essentially develops a platform, administrative and compliance platform, that allows their key employees, their highly compensated group, that's typically defined by Department of Labor as your top 30% of your salary census. And those people, if they want to, an employer can just, open up a plan that allows them to defer more money, and it's done. But most employers will allow their people to defer more above their 401k plan into deferred compensation arrangements. And then you can add retention and reward components to that, all with tremendous tax advantages to the employer. And certainly you're keeping your key people who are looking to defer more than the limitations, as I suggested earlier. They can do some very creative financial and estate planning for themselves and their families. And by the way, part of the retirement aspect of what we do with our companies, our clients, is that we provide individual financial planning and retirement forecasting as an executive benefit. For example, if you have a company and you have 3 key guys and you want to provide them a perk in addition to a country club membership and maybe a car, pay the financial planning fees each year for them so they can get advice to not only direct their employer benefits that they're receiving properly, but they can also direct their personal financial decisions as well. And that all goes into the retirement aspect of the 5R.
Okay, one other question here. Thoughts on variable portion of compensation, individual comp on sales, gross margin or profit versus team-based variable comp based on the same or blends between the two and ideal ratios. How do you reward the golf team for individual performance and the golf team for their roll-up performance?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, great question. We are big believers in variable comp, and we start with a fundamental premise. And the fundamental premise is this: is that when we define profit, and it could be EBITDA, it could be a percentage of gross profit, or even on margin. When we define that, we always address the capital cost to that margin. And we take the shareholders and the investors and we actually attach an actual cost of that money. And as you know, for those of you who are familiar with this, is that number can be anywhere. It could be 5%, it could be 30%. But typically we see anywhere from 8 to 12 to 15%. We subtract that from the actual profit or whatever measurement you have, and that becomes the value creation that you then share with your key people or with your entire company. So without getting into a whole lot more detail because of time, give me a call or send me an email. I'll be glad to share a little bit more detail with you. We also know that you have individual performance, you have team or department performance, and then you have overall company performance. We're big believers in addressing all three, but what we've seen, and this is our experience, not our theory, what we've seen is that the companies that tend to perform better, we do a lot of research and surveying of our existing client base, is that the companies that tend to weigh more company overall performance, but still address individual and department or as this question says, team, they tend to do better. And we think that that one of the reasons is that when you have a culture that communicates the role of everyone in that company and communicates clearly what impact that function has to overall performance, it tends to take away the myopic focus of employees and key people that are only looking at maybe the 2 or 3 metrics that you told them they're responsible for. I'm not saying it's not important, but what I'm saying is that you tend to broaden the scope of each person at the company in terms of what they do and their contribution to the company's success every day, how that plays into overall results.
Tom, we have one more time for just one more question, and then we'll have to wrap it up. This question comes from John Quillen, says, what are the taxation advantages for the receiver in a phantom stock plan? Just a sort of a gentle overview.
Yeah, I like the question, gentle. that means just give me a little bit of stuff. Don't kill me with data. Well, first of all, the phantom stock as opposed to stock, when you get an option, for example, if you've ever worked for a company, public company, you get an option. Okay, that has a timestamp on it, and it has an exercise period, and that means you have to come out of pocket with it, which is an after-tax expense, right? Now, when you're granted a phantom stock unit, that is a grant that has no taxation event to it at all at the time of the grant. And whether or not you have vesting provisions on that, that's a whole nother conversation. But when a phantom share is actually realized and paid out, that comes in as ordinary income. The problem between the two is not necessarily from the receiver's perspective, but it comes from the employer's perspective. There's essentially a double taxation event that occurs with the employer, the company, compared to an individual offering of a phantom stock or a phantom share or even a phantom appreciation right, which is basically getting a unit value of reward that's tied to the increase above a certain share price in a given year. That's the appreciation aspect of it. There's a lot more there, and I'm sorry I haven't been given the time to really go into that too much detail, but I'll be glad to follow up with you and talk to you about that more in detail. And also, if you'll visit my blog, I've got a lot of articles that talk about that as well.
Tom, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today and for sharing your wisdom on compensation strategies in the new world, because a lot has changed in this new environment, and I'm sure a lot of people would have a lot of interest in talking with you. I encourage you, please feel free to reach out directly to Tom. He's a very accommodating person, would love to help you in any way. You have his contact details here, and you're more than welcome to contact him directly. He's based in San Antonio, so he may be, depending upon your time zone, he may be an hour behind you, or he may be on your time zone. So just keep that into consideration. But Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and to also share, again, your wisdom. Everything that you have imparted upon everybody today. It's been a real pleasure having you join us today.